Hey everybody. So in this video I'm going to be talking to you about lenses and lens focal length. I'll kind of break down what you're going to expect to see when you're looking at your lens and what all the different numbers and words mean on your lens. Also, I'll talk about the anatomy of the lens as well. And then I'm going to talk to you about focal length, and I'm going to discuss how focal length affects your image when you're making your pictures. Okay, so just so you know, focal length is the distance between the optical center of the lens and the camera sensor or film plane when focused at infinity. It defines the field of view. Okay, so we'll come back and I'll talk about this in a little bit. But the first thing I want to show you here is this slide. And here I want to kind of break down what you're going to expect to see when you're looking at your lens. Okay, so all of you are going to have something that looks like this on your lens. This is a lens, actually this is two lenses from Canon. So you see here in this top slide, these numbers indicated over here and also some words. So here we have the brand of the lens, right? So we have a Canon. This is the model, the EF, and then you have here 85 millimeters. And 85 millimeters refers to the lens's focal length. Okay, so I outlined that in the previous slide. And then you have here this lens ratio and max aperture. So that is going to refer to the widest aperture available to you in your lens. Okay, so in this particular lens here, we have f1.4, so that's going to be the most open the lens will be when using it. Okay, that's also going to be probably indicated on the inner rim of the lens as well. So the words that you see here along the outside of the lens are also going to be here on the rim of the lens when you look at it straight on. Okay, then looking down here at this other slide, this is more about the anatomy of the lens. Right here we have the hood mount, and this is actually a threaded area where you can attach different things to the front of your lens. So this could be protective things like a UV filter, which is just a clear filter that protects the actual glass of the lens. You can also put polarizers on here or other colored filters. Then here you have the focusing ring. So the focusing ring allows you to change the focus with your lens, okay? I'm not sure if you're using this because most of you will probably be using autofocus in some capacity. Okay, and speaking of focus here, you can switch between autofocus and manual focus with the switch on your lens. Sometimes this can be found on the camera body itself, depending on what kind of camera you have. Okay, the distance scale, so this is showing you just what is in focus based on how far the lens is extended. This particular lens here has a range of focal lengths, as you can see, so 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters, and we'll talk about what those mean here in a minute. And to control the different focal lengths, you have this zoom ring, so turning this ring around the lens will extend or detract the lens length, so it'll change the focal length. And then here you have your focal length indicator, so this also works in tandem with the zoom ring, so these numbers will change depending on how far the lens is extended, and it'll indicate it here. And then you have here finally the mount, and this is where the camera and the lens meet, so where you attach your lens to your camera. Okay, so you should all have this in some capacity on your lenses. This one just happens to be a Canon, but depending on your lens, it might look a little different. And then here in this slide, I want to talk a little bit about focal length. So we defined it in our first slide. And what you need to pay attention to here is the length of the lens, so measured in millimeters. It's going to change the angle at which your lens is capturing at. Okay, so for our purposes with our own eyes, we see at about a 40-degree angle. Okay, so if you look here in the middle, you have normal, And what this normal is indicating is what the normal length of angle that we would see when we're looking through our own eyes. And this is going to be equivalent to the DSLR format, right? So the DSLR format, remember, is coming from 35 millimeter format. And that just determines the size of your sensor in the digital case, right? So here we have the normal range, right? So this is average situations and snapshots. This is giving you an examples of what you can use these different focal lengths for. But right here we have this 50 millimeter. And most of your cameras, the stock lenses, are going to give you access to this 50 millimeters. It might open up to a wide angle and to a medium telephoto, right? So some of your lenses will have a focal length of 28 to, let's say, 70 or 80. Some of you might have other lenses that allow for a wider angle or a longer focal length, right? So just to take you through some of these different focal lengths, notice that the lower the focal length number, meaning the shorter the lens, the wider the angle in which your camera can capture, or your lens can capture, right? So right here we have extreme wide angles. This is like architecture and interiors. We have from 14 millimeters all the way through 24. Okay, so if you're using this focal length, most likely it's going to be a wide angle or extreme wide angle. Then we have 28 millimeters to 35 millimeters. We have a wide angle, right? Landscapes, group portraits, or large group portraits. We already talked about normal. We have medium telephoto, so portraits and children. I'm not sure why they have children on here. That's kind of strange. But you can see here about from 70 to 100 millimeters. And then telephoto, 100 millimeters to 300. And then super telephoto, super long distances. And you can see here how the angle changes, right? So as the focal length increases, the angle at which the lens is able to capture kind of narrows, right? To see this in kind of practice here, if we were to stand on this scene, you can see here just the indicator of the focal length and then the angle at which it's capturing, right? So we talked about 50 millimeters being normal. This is kind of what we can see if we were looking through our own eyes. As we increase the focal length, the angle at which we can see through the lens narrows, right? So the lens and the focal length, they impact a number of different things. Okay, so we already talked about the rendition of depth. It also changes the corners, so it distorts corners depending on how long the focal length is. It also affects depth of field, and it also can be affected by camera movement. Okay, so this, because when we're looking through the lenses that are really long, any kind of movement within our lens or within our camera is going to be really, really amplified, right? You think about this when you look at the world through binoculars. When you're looking through the binoculars, any kind of subtle movement is really going to shake what you're seeing through the binoculars. And here again, I have another example of just how focal length is affecting what you're seeing through your lens, right? So you can see here we're starting up at 17 millimeters. You see a really wide expanse of what's in front of you, right? You can see out into the distance, but it's very, very small. And as we increase our focal length, or lengthen our focal length, you can start to see more of what's going on in the scene, but what you see around it is shrinking, right? So here we have 55 millimeters, and this is normal. And pay attention here to 400 millimeters, which is an extreme telephoto. At this distance, you can see the windows in the building, the bridges, the water, okay? And at this distance, like we just talked about with camera movement, you probably are going to have to use a tripod because, again, the movement of your camera is going to affect the image, right? So if you're not photographing with a really fast shutter speed, chances are that you're going to have to be on a tripod. And remember that you're increasing the weight of the camera as well, so manipulating it physically is going to be more difficult. And then this next slide here is just to show you how different focal lengths will affect distortion within the image. And this is most evident, I think, when we're looking at portraiture, right? So starting here at 20 millimeters, the middle of the lens is kind of bulging out, so this nose and the eyes and all the features actually become really exaggerated. And as we increase our focal length, you can see here that the face actually starts to shrink in, which is quite interesting, right? So typically, remember when we look back to that first chart, your portraiture is going to be somewhere between like 70 millimeters and 105 millimeters, right? And as we go to 200 millimeters, you can see here that the face is kind of shrunken in. So a true kind of representation of a portraiture would be something between here and here. Okay? So that's going to be your lens anatomy and focal lengths. I hope this kind of gives you some perspective on how your lens work, and then also which lenses are going to be the best tools depending on the situation which you're photographing in. Okay? And I should just say that, you don't necessarily need to have different focal length lenses, right? Depending on what your eye does and how critical and refined it is, you can make totally acceptable portraits or landscapes or any type of photography with the lens available to you. Okay, so I say that just so you don't feel like you have to go out and buy all these lenses to make good pictures. You can make good pictures with what is available to you. All right, so that's lenses and focal length. I hope it's helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.